Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jane Hewitt and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. We're very excited that this session is also taking place today as part of the Victorian Government's Digital Innovation Festival 2020. So if you're attending as part of the festival, a doubly warm welcome to you. Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart creative use of technology. For those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops and boot camps and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. You can check out our training and events calendar on the website. I'd now like to welcome you to the webinar Embracing Working from Home, Communications in a COVID World, which will be presented by Daniel Crespi, who is the goodness generator at Goodtel. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Jane. Thanks.
We'll just start with a bit of housekeeping today. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your GoToWebinar panel and I'll be able to assist you. And if you have any questions during the session, please type them into the questions box and Daniel will be able to answer these throughout the session or we'll save them for the Q&A at the end of the workshop. Please note that your comments and your questions won't be appearing to the entire group. If you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, could you please shut them to get the best experience of the audio and video? Please note that this webinar is being recorded and a link to the recordings and the slides will be sent to you after the webinar. We'd also appreciate if you took a few moments to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar so we can get your feedback and improve future webinars. That's all from me. I will now pass over to Daniel to get things started.
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate that. Thanks for the introduction as well. Daniel Crespi from Goodtel. Goodness Generator is my title. I essentially look after all business generation for our organisation. I'll talk to you a little bit more about our business at the end of the session. Today's session, Embracing Working from Home Communications in a COVID World. There may be a feeling of us trying to jump on a bandwagon at the moment in terms of opportunities out of the COVID world, but the reality is that there's a genuine momentum happening in the telecommunications space. Not all driven by COVID in its own right, but certainly COVID has become a clear catalyst for the changes that we're seeing in the marketplace at the moment. COVID. What we've seen with the COVID environment is that businesses, organisations, not-for-profits have really been forced to embrace the change as a result of the COVID pandemic. Previously, the idea of working from home was I thought it was in consideration. Teleworking, remote working was something that we were exploring or thinking about, but never really doing anything serious about it. Suddenly, we found that organisations have been forced to embrace it, forced it to take it on. And like any change, what we've found is that they've liked the change. Certainly, there are negatives. Certainly, there are organisations that struggle with the changes that they've been forced to endure. But equally, there've been significant benefits. Some of them financial, some of them just in terms of better productivity of the organisation, and so it's really added to the momentum of moving to the cloud that we're seeing. I thought we should talk about cloud. It's a very common term. It's certainly in our world, it's probably the most discussed movement or change that we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, no question. But specifically, when we're talking about cloud within the telecoms arena, I wanted to talk about what that means in this discussion. in particular, what cloud means is moving the on-premise equipment that businesses, organisations, not-for-profits used to have in their office environments or in their places of business, and that box or that piece of equipment has been moved into the cloud. So in our world, we talk about it being moved into the network environment, into the telecoms environment. But what it means is that that equipment, that the smarts, the intelligence of the telephone switching is no longer held on premise. It's now held somewhere else and managed by a network, somebody operating via the cloud environment. The result of it is automatically producing access or providing access to significantly improved features that the average smaller organisation was not able to access. It also provided convenience around telephony and communications that previously wasn't, the businesses previously weren't able to access, because these were the sorts of features and benefits that were only available to large corporates with extremely large budgets to pay for them. And the obvious tie-in with this is that what we're seeing now is that, you know, post-COVID, with this access into the cloud environment, what we're seeing is a really facilitated access to working from home. And that's really what we want to talk about today, because that's really what the COVID environment starts to talk about. And we've just done a poll, and it looks like 89% of the attendees aren't using cloud at the moment. So that's a pretty interesting intel. So you know, the key question that we want to be asking today is up on the screen, but can your team members work from home in the same way as they do in the office? And if the answer to this question is no, then that's really why we should be talking about a hosted solution in your workplace, because it does facilitate. It is something that can be done fairly easily, and we'll talk about it in a moment. And certainly it does add enormous advantages to what you can be doing on a day-to-day basis. So in order to do this, though, we really need to talk about the fundamentals. You know, like building a house or any construct that you do, if you don't have the right foundations, the rest of the solution will not work well. Good internet is the foundation of a good telephony solution or a good hosted telephone solution. And like it or hate it, in the Australian marketplace, we are very fortunate that the NBN is delivering an excellent and cost-effective internet solution to the majority of workplaces in Australia, not to mention the homes as well. So, you know, you've either got NBN or you haven't. As I said, the majority of organisations that I work with and the majority of residential contacts that we deal with, they do have NBN available to them. NBN is cost effective and efficient to put in place, but where it's not available, there are other alternatives. So whenever we're exploring putting in a new phone system, we're certainly making sure that the first step in the conversation is about whether or not we can deliver firstly NBN. If the answer then is not NBN, then we'd be talking about a mobile 4G solution. And for the larger organisations where, say, these solutions may not be sufficient, we're looking at much higher speed, business grade services. So point-to-point data, Ethernet services, and that sort of thing, which again, typically we'd be looking at on a case-by-case basis. We may be using the NBN network in those environments where it's available, but if not, we're exploring what the options are available before we go about talking about a hosted telephone solution for the the upgrade to a COVID environment. So look, once internet is solved, and assuming, of course, that a hosted voice solution is the right solution, we can start to look at the phone system itself. I'll touch on whether or not hosted voice is the right solution a bit later on, but there are examples where it isn't the right fit. And the reality is that sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow, but it's something that we need to accept. There are certain environments where hosted doesn't make sense, either technologically or economically, and we would rule it out. It's not the norm. It's certainly the minority of cases that we would be looking into, but hosted can be the right fit in certain instances. All right, so let's talk about the different types of hosted solutions that might go in. So in the standard scenario, which is I suppose the older of the newer generation, we'd be talking about cable handsets. So is there the appropriate cabling in place in the environment, in the working environment? If that is the case, then cabled handsets are effective. However, when we're talking about the working from home environment, things start to change where not all home premises can really work with a cabled handset. If you look at my environment, so all of Goodtel works from home. We operate in New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland. I'm in New South Wales, for example. We, as a household, don't want to have a blue Ethernet cable running all the way through from one end of the house to where my office sits at the other end. So a cabled handset simply wouldn't work in our environment. So we have a Wi-Fi enabled handset. The minimum requirement is simply that it accesses the internet, and therefore I can then access the telephone system for our business. Obviously, some home environments could have a cabled handset, and so that would work. And equally, then there is I suppose the newer options in terms of accessing the phone system, which would be no handset at all, which might mean using a soft client of some form, which can either be on the mobile phone as an app, or on a laptop or a desktop indeed as a piece of software running on the phone on the laptop, on the device itself. Now, that may not always be the appropriate selection, so I don't think we're in a world yet where we would simply rule out handsets, because there are clear benefits to having a handset. So, for example, in the work that I do on the phone constantly using two screens and the like, I actually prefer to have a handset separate to my working screens, because it allows me to keep them separate and work separately and see what's going on just with the phone call that I'm using while still working and taking notes and doing all that sort of thing while the call's still happening. So we have very clear different applications of handsets, and when we're looking at a COVID environment, when we're looking at an organisation that's trying to adapt and have themselves set up, there are different requirements in terms of what handset would apply for a business. So recently I did an install for a Connecting Up member, and we've put in place a combination of both cable and Wi-Fi handsets, so that it enables them to have the flexibility of working both in the office environment and also having people work permanently or semi-permanently from home, but also just manages the technology that they've got in their environment. Equally, I've got another another Connecting Up client who is looking at a complete setup using PC clients and mobile clients only. And there are pros and cons to each of those. All right. But the summary is by having these handsets in place, you have significantly better control of the telephone. And what we would suggest in terms of the post-COVID world is, or the COVID world, is that you use the mobile phone to complement the phone system. And again, I'll touch on that a little bit later on. But it doesn't necessarily, the mobile phone doesn't necessarily function efficiently or well enough, effectively enough, in order to simply replace the phone system. It's simply, for example, we wouldn't run our business on mobile phones only because we wouldn't be able to manage the different work areas and manage the different calls that come in at different times. So now let's talk about the different scenarios, and we think we've probably captured the majority of the scenarios. And if there are any different ones that come up, please raise them in the questions question period at the end of the session. But we think these next examples kind of cover the majority of the new working environments that we need to embrace. The first one is this scenario, the case, sort of this scenario of we've got part of the workforce at home and part of the workforce in the office environment, or a mixture of the two, and combining with conferencing sort of webinars like we're doing today, but not everyone in the same environment, or pushing more and more of the workforce into the home environment. And again, it's really clear that a hosted telephony solution or a hosted voice solution addresses this really effectively. Firstly, because if I guess if it's a semi-permanent or for an extended period of time where the workforce is going to be working from home, simply taking a handset, plugging it into the internet at home, and then functioning as if you are sitting next to a colleague in the office, that immediately removes any of the complications in terms of being distanced from your colleagues, and being able to handle and carry out normal day-to-day business in the office environment. Sorry, in the working from home environment, and still function effectively. All right. The kind of features that become extremely important are very much tied to how do you control the call as it comes into the work environment. So, for example, things like a call conference. For example, things like internal and external transfers of calls, but also things like voicemail and where is that voicemail received by the office environment. As an example, if a call comes into the business and then that call lands on a voicemail, who then hears that voicemail? It can be very important in an environment where everybody's not next to each other. So in that scenario, the ability to take a voicemail and send it to an email, but that email to be distributed to more than one or a group of people becomes quite important, depending on what the business is trying to achieve or what it does on a day-to-day basis, or as an organisation in terms of how it operates. All right, and again, the ability to do this interchangeably from home or from work, or a mixture of the two, is increasingly important when you're having this new operating world. All right, the other scenario is, or the other sort of objection that we're finding around looking at new phone systems and taking us into what is now the standard of a phone system is, I don't have a dedicated IT team to manage the phone system, which is now becoming an IT add-on or adjunct. So, and that really is a bit of a myth when we're looking at what's going on in a hosted voice environment. So the summary is that because we now no longer have the equipment on premise, and there's no longer a significant installation required in order to make the system work effectively, IT involvement is fairly minimal. As an example, to install a phone now, or an entire phone system, is a product of plugging the handset into the power and plugging the handset into the internet. Now, if it's a Wi-Fi enabled handset, that simply means putting in a password into the handset itself. If it's a cabled handset, often that will mean simply be plugging the cable into the back of the phone. That is the extent of the install in terms of what the customer has to do to manage, to address installing a new phone system. In terms of the actual setup of the phone system itself, what you can see there are the three things that we require. So the first thing is a copy of the existing bill. If it is a new phone system, sorry, a replacement of an existing phone system. If we're talking about a new phone system altogether, obviously that's not required. But if we're talking about simply transferring a PBX into a new hosted voice system, we require a copy of the phone bill. And the reason for that is to make sure that we're capturing all of the services that the customer currently has. It also enables us to ensure that there aren't any numbers that we're going to miss when we move those numbers onto the new phone system. The other thing that we need to do is just to simply understand how the call is going to be managed within the office environment. So the hosted system or hosted voice solution provides significant upgrade of features, which I've mentioned previously, things like an announcement before the call comes into the organisation, but also things like an auto attendant, press 1 for sales, 2 for memberships, whatever it is, and that there's no fixed rule as to what we use the auto attendant for, but obviously we need to understand how that's going to be set up in the business. So that typically involves a 10-minute conversation with one of our onboarding team, and that's essentially the extent of the setup. And then the final piece that we need from a new organisation when they're setting themselves up is the call recordings, the recordings for their voice announcements. So, for example, if you are going to have an announcement prior to the call being presented to the people receiving the call in the organisation, you simply need an announcement which can be recorded professionally if that's your choice, or you can record it on a smartphone simply using the recording app on the phone and then distributing that through to the caller. Simply load it up on the phone system. Caller hears that recording and then sends the call through. So pretty basic stuff. In terms of an IT expertise, it's minimal. There is the odd scenario where there might need to be some adjustment made in terms of the existing network, but rarely does that require on-site attendance. And the majority of the time that's done simply remotely, and it's simply plugging in the plug in a different space because the setup was non-standard or had just been missed. And so our experience there is that that's simply not a requirement. And in terms of time frame, we talk about we'd like to allow a 10-day time frame, but the reality is once we've received the information that we've listed there, a phone system is installed really within 5 days of receipt of all of that information. So it is pretty quick. It's pretty painless, and our support is 7 days a week. So in terms of ongoing management and the like, there's no requirements there either, because most of it's remote and clients can call in to our technical support remotely, and that should be the case for most hosted voice providers if you're not looking at GoodTel as an example. All right. I suppose this third scenario really might look like a bit of a pitch about GoodTel. We are talking to the Connecting Up membership, and I suppose we see ourselves as like-minded. But I think the point being made here in terms of selecting a new phone system and how you go about taking on making this decision is also about selecting the right sort of provider in terms of who you work for. So let's park the fact that there's a bit of self-promotion going on here. The point that I'm really making here is that this should be a long-term decision, not simply a decision because we are going through a bit of an odd period in terms of the pandemic. You know, whether we stay in this environment or whether we move back to working more in the office environment, or whether we look at a combination of those, what's really important is that we're looking at a decision that suits the business. So earlier on, I touched on the scenario where a hosted voice may not be the right fit. Now, it's very easy for an organisation, if they're making a decision to take a hosted voice service, to hear all of the enormous pros and cons of a hosted voice system. But the reality is there are some organisations where it will simply not work for them. So I was talking recently to a Connecting Up member. They had something like 15 or 16 handsets in the environment, and yet really they had 2 phone lines. And that's an example where a hosted voice solution is unlikely to meet their needs and is going to be an expensive option. And whilst that's a rare scenario, normally you would reduce the number of handsets to reduce costs. In that environment, they needed the number of handsets, and we wouldn't recommend a hosted voice solution for them. And so it's important that sort of digging question is asked, and that the solution provider that you're speaking to is actually listening to the problem and trying to solve the problem, rather than just trying to sell something to the client in order to get a service on board. And then I think also there are a lot of sharks in the market environment, and you will have seen the Connecting Up pricing is very competitive through Goodtel, but also the review of your current costs versus the new solution. Really, there should also be a consideration of, is this a good commercial decision for you to move to a hosted voice solution? Sure, there are significant advantages in terms of features and benefits and efficiencies, but it also needs to be clear that move makes commercial sense, and certainly, you know, that consultative longer term approach in terms of the solution provider is key to making this the right decision. And we really encourage that, you know, that organisation is tested out on that ilk. So finally, I touched on this a bit earlier in terms of the scenarios. There is a temptation to look at a mobile-only solution as the right solution for going working from home environment, and often I'll hear the suggestion, well, why don't we just take it all onto mobile? And I think that this becomes a little bit short-sighted when you are trying to look at this understanding of a proper call control of the calls coming into the organisation. So you know, if we're looking at scenarios of where you've got sensitive calls coming in, simply terminating a call onto the mobile network means that the organisation no longer controls the call. So I touched on that before. You know, if the voicemail goes to the individual's voicemail on the mobile, and there's been no control of that call within the organisation, that has repercussions in terms of how the business or the organisation or the not-for-profit wants to engage with its callers. The other thing that you have the benefits of with a hosted solution is the majority of the solutions now offer included calls to mobile. So the idea of diverting calls to a mobile is no longer a significant expense. And so rather than simply working off a mobile solution, the idea is that you use the mobile as a complement. So that could mean simply using the mobile in its own right, so simply receiving the calls to the mobile number. Or the other alternative, which I touched on earlier, is you might consider putting a soft client on the mobile phone. And what that means is that the mobile phone has the app that is tied to the phone system, and when the call is made, the call is received through the mobile app, and therefore the answerer of the call is receiving the call via the phone system, not via the mobile, which means that, for example, if the call is not for that person, they can transfer it back, which means that they can conference other people in. It means that they can do call recordings, all the sorts of things that are added into the phone system, but they are available on the mobile phone. And so a combination of these two sorts of features become really key if you're wanting to control the way that the call is going to be handled within your organisation. And sort of to add on to that point, where we're at today in terms of how we purchase mobile services is that we have really moved away from the need to lock ourselves into onerous long-term contracts with very expensive priced plans. What you should be looking for is a provider that enables you to be flexible around the solution so that you can properly manage what is your usage on the mobile services, again, as a complement to what you're doing. There's no suggestion that mobiles are not a critical component of a workforce that's not in the office or is on the field. But what there is a suggestion of is it should complement what the business is doing in its centralised format and working out to its staff on the road, as an example. And I think that sometimes we miss that until we don't have it. And that's definitely something to think about when you're looking at moving into the COVID world. All right, so the summary here is in terms of a phone system. The summary here is, these are the questions that we'd be asking. Is your internet sufficient to enable you to transition to the cloud? And if the answer to that question is no, then before you be exploring anything in terms of a hosted solution, a cloud solution, you really need to address this piece. And the reality of today is that there are very, very few examples where a decent internet solution isn't able to be provided in a cost-effective manner to enable you to go to a hosted solution. Then the next question is, if we're looking at a COVID environments where you want to be working from home, is the handset Wi-Fi enabled? The cost differences of a handset on Wi-Fi versus cabled are a couple of dollars a month, or in terms of purchasing, it's a $100 difference depending on the handset you're talking about. But the features that handset is going to add in terms of the flexibility is quite significant. And also, does a mix of the two work well for you? And do you need the flexibility, say, of complement of the mobile service with that phone system, or even a soft client running off the phone system as well? And they're the sorts of questions that you should be asking if you're looking at taking on a hosted system. And then let's just have a look at what are the steps in terms of moving to the cloud, because again, just touching on the point before, which is most people see the move to a hosted system as complicated and a big hurdle. But in reality, if we just look at these simple steps in terms of what's required, it's actually a lot simpler than people believe. So firstly, the question is a hosted service the right service for you? I touched on examples where it's not, but that's a question that needs to be addressed. Majority of cases you're going to find it is. There are some examples where it's not, so rule those out. And if in doubt, feel free to come and ask me the question, even if you're not looking at GoodTel. Decide on the provider. Make sure the provider is going to align well to what you need, not just that they're looking to sell a service, because ultimately this is a long-term decision. The goal that we would be looking for you to take is not to have to buy your phone system every 3 to 4 years, or even 2 to 3 years. But the idea is that you've got a system that's going to be flexible enough to move with you over time. Then take a decision in terms of what kind of handsets do you want. and whether you want to use a soft client solution or not. I'm of the view that a soft client solution works in some instances. I'm certainly of the view that a combination of them works very well. I'm still, despite the fact that I thought, maybe 10 years ago that we wouldn't be using the phone system, what I see is that in practical applications, the handset still is a prerequisite in order to function well in certain organisations, and it's not something that you can simply assume it's not going to exist straight away, because it just doesn't seem to be the case. As I said, ensure the right internet supply. A hosted system will not work with bad internet. Don't even try it, and make sure you've tested that first, and then take a decision in terms of how the call is going to come into the organisation. Where do you want the calls to land originally? Does it go to a receptionist? Does it go to multiple extensions? Does it go to an auto attendant? Those sorts of questions, which are really easy to introduce, really easy to implement, but just in terms of what do you want? Because what you want is now available, and then just agreeing to installation and timing in terms of how you're going to do that. And it's also worth considering that because a hosted system in majority of cases can function at the same time as your existing phone system, there's also the ability to run the systems in parallel and then transfer them over. That's not always the case, but there are many instances where you can do that, and it's certainly worth exploring that as an option. Okay. Here comes the acknowledged self-promotion piece, but I think it is worth us touching on who we are in terms of the provider. Firstly, we're a business that's been built around the not-for-profit industry. We support charities as part of our day-to-day business. So every service that we sell, any piece of business that we do, comes with a contribution to a charity. And that's a fixed part of our model that will not change. The services that we sell are what we call, or what are now known as existing generation, but traditionally we're called the next generation of telecoms, which is the cloud services, the NBN, the mobile services, and residential services as well. As I mentioned, we put 50% of our profit back into charity. And that's something we very much believe in terms of as an organisation. We measure ourselves on the contribution rather than our revenue. And the other thing about our solution is that it is no different in terms of the technology and in terms of the expertise to the other providers that you would typically work with. So, for example, the two founders of the business, between us, we have in the order of 60 years of experience within the telecoms, and we have networks within the Australian telecommunications industry that enables us to implement a solid working organisation that provides you with excellent customer service. All right, so that's the end of my formal presentation. But I guess what I'd like to do is open up the floor to see if there are any questions that I might not have covered, or any questions that have been prompted by what I have raised with you today.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Jane.
We've had a question from Paul, but I think you may have answered this. But he was asking, our current cloud telecom platform for managing inbound and outbound calls operates by calls dropping into the agent without warning when they are in accepting calls mode. This is problematic for our team who prefer the more traditional way of picking up a ringing phone at their leisure. Does your product lend to a more traditional way of answering inbound calls in a call group?
So the answer to this question is never simple, because I'd need to understand how big a call center we're talking, and what the requirement is. But certainly the way that you can set up a phone system in general terms is that an agent can control when they're going to receive and when they're not going to receive a call. the ability to provide additional features around this really depends on how large a call centre we're talking. On the standard sort of small business solution, the agent can simply make themselves available or not. On a larger scaled solution, we'd be looking at ACD, so call centre software packages that would manage this in very different ways. What I'd really like to do, maybe Paul, if I can have a chat with you, if you pop me a note, let's have a chat just about what you're specifically looking at, and I can see if I can solution that for you.
Okay, great, thank you. Sarah is asking, how does a non-profit become a charity partner?
So that's a good question. We have a few, we'll call it structures that we work with. So in the first instance, we work with our 10 charity partners. We're very conscious of not wanting to dilute the benefit that we put to our charity partners. So that you'll see that there's a fairly broad section, a cross section of who they are. And we review that sort of annually just to make sure it's the right fit and it is continuing to deliver. I just put the list up there for you. So just continuing to address what we want in terms of bringing on partners across the board. We have then two other models that we sort of work with around this. So one is a referral partner. So a referral partner is a not-for-profit who probably doesn't have the reach of the larger or better known charity partners and may not benefit as well from that construct there. And what we do with those partners is if they've got a particular donor base that they work in, they can market into their donor base and receive like a referral commission for sales that go into their member base. And then the sort of hybrid model is where we have a charity partner who isn't as broad in terms of this group, but has a large enough donor base where we can help them contribute. And what we do there is we sort of create them as their own charity partner in their own right within their own membership. And again, happy to talk to whomever it is to see if we can make it work. Ultimately, we're looking for the best outcome for the not-for-profit.
Cool. And the final question so far, how much has Goodtel donated so far?
Yeah, oh gosh, I think that is, we haven't made a profit in our own right as a business in the last financial year, but we donated as a business, I'm going to get tested, $14,570 in the first 6 months so far. Oh, so we wanted to make sure that we are contributing even when we're not yet operating as a profitable organisation, and we'll continue to do that. So we're sort of looking at percentages of revenue as a model until we get there. It's very much part of our raison d'etre that we will always be contributing no matter what's going on the other side of the P&L.
Fantastic. I think that's all the questions we have at the moment. If anybody else has got any more, feel free to drop Daniel a line. His email was on the last slide there. There we go. Daniel@goodtel.au.
Yeah, so I suppose what I would say is, look, if anyone is even looking simply for advice around what to do, I'm quite happy to assist in terms of giving the right direction. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're looking for for me to provide you with a service directly. I've done this with quite a few of the, in fact, quite a few of the Connecting Up members who've just simply asked me, what is the solution? I didn't have a solution specifically, but I've then helped them in terms of doing the right thing, what they're doing. The other thing that we've been doing quite a bit of is analysing existing telecoms bills and just analysing those to see if they can produces a cost saving based on either a Goodtel supply or looking at going back to their supplier if they're constrained with doing that, for us to help them in terms of improving their costs.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel, for presenting today. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've all learnt from this presentation. And if you are one of the festival attendees, we're hosting another festival event on the 4th of September, which is called How to Get Found Online, which is also available if you just pop along to connectingup.org. You can see the listing on there. Just a quick reminder, please could everybody leave feedback for us in the post-event survey, which will appear at the end of the workshop. And again, thanks very much for being with us. Enjoy your day. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Jane.